Oh, the humanity! Oh, the calamity! Oh, this train derailment disaster in Ohio is the worst thing ever! If I could make one bad comparison, I'd call it the Chernobyl of our era! If images like this coming out of Ohio have suddenly shocked you into being a champion for environmentalism and the state of our country's rail infrastructure, allow me to be the first to say,
What took you so long, idiot?
And if this disaster has gotten you to start caring about train derailments, I've got news for you. Between 1990 and 2021, an average of 1,704 trains derailed every year. And this is well-known information. The federal government has been tracking this. This is anything but unusual. And if this disaster has suddenly made you start caring about Ohio, like, oh, you cared about Ohio the whole time, look at this. Just 50 years ago, the Ohio River ran red with unregulated pollution and was quite inhospitable to aquatic life, which decimated fish populations. Smog hung over the Ohio River Valley from the stacks of steel plants which belched smoke and stench along the river. In addition, during the mid-20th century, many birds, including bald eagles, showed signs of succumbing to the unintended side effects of the pesticide DDT that eventually caused chronic nesting failure for countless species. Now, this kind of makes it sound like, oh, the Ohio River has made a dramatic turnaround, and in some cases, yes, it has. But in other cases, it's still going. Industrial discharges from coal-fired power plants, steel and aluminum manufacturers, petrochemical plants, and other businesses accounted for nearly 41 million pounds of toxic pollution released into the Ohio River Basin. 41 million pounds! That is an astronomical amount. Now take a look at this. This is an article on the Cuyahoga River that runs through Cleveland, Ohio. The water was nearly always covered in oil slicks, and it bubbled like a deadly stew. Sometimes rats floated by, their corpses so bloated they were practically the size of dogs. It was disturbing, but it was also just one of the realities of the city. For more than a century, the Cuyahoga River had been prime real estate for various manufacturing companies. Everyone knew it was polluted, but pollution meant industry was thriving. The economy was booming, and everyone had jobs. If that isn't an indictment on capitalism. Look at this picture taken from the river in 1964. Look at that. To say that these rivers have made improvements, while it is true, it's still a slap in the face to the people who have to live alongside them, who have to live with the long-term consequences of the pollution, who have to deal with the pollution that's still happening to this day. And to add insult to injury, as if living in Ohio wasn't already bad enough, we have the disaster in East Palestine, which I will blame in part on the Staggers Rail Act of 1980. And I want to turn your attention to this article that was written back in 2005 by Clifford Winston, who has this weird boner for deregulation. And in this article, he goes on to praise the Staggers Rail Act as this marvelous staple of deregulation in the rail industry for both rail owners and anyone that uses rail services. It's just the best thing since sliced bread. Now, I want you to hold that thought. Because it's Trump time, baby! That's right, he rolled back regulations on the transportation of natural gas. Now, I'm sure this included a lot more, but even if it didn't, you give corporations an inch and they'll lobby for a mile. And they'll lobby for more and more and more. Now, on to the disasters. On January 6th of 2005, in Graniteville, South Carolina, a train carrying 3 tanker cars of liquid chlorine under pressure was inadvertently switched onto an industrial spur where it crashed into a parked locomotive. The train derailed, and one of the chlorine tankers was breached, releasing approximately 46 tons of chlorine immediately and an additional 14 tons over the next 3 days. July 10th, 2005. 2 freight trains collided and the collision resulted in the derailment of 6 locomotives and 17 cars. This resulted in about 15,000 gallons of diesel fuel being released in a big fire that burned for about 15 hours. And if I haven't yet made my point, September 17th, 2005, a commuter train in Illinois derailed. It passed a 10-mile-an-hour switch at 69 miles an hour, causing the train to derail, which resulted in 2 fatalities, 4 passengers being injured that required hospitalization, and there were 46 passengers who were treated with minor injuries at the scene. And don't worry, there's more where that came from, because remember, we still have 1,700 more derailments to go for the years between 1990 and 2021. Now, allow me to humor you with some history. You see, back in the day, we had this greasy jamoke, Cornelius Vanderbilt, who owned all of these railroads. Now that was just the East Coast. The West Coast was a different story. And these guys were some nasty dudes. They set up shop in the Bay Area of California and expanded from there. As this article describes, the landscape of the Bay Area lent itself nicely to exploitation by the Big Four. With the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, a new era of overland commerce in America had begun, linking the formerly isolated West Coast with the manufacturing-intensive East Coast. Central Pacific was the only company that had laid track going east. In addition, the Big Four started building railroads that linked the Bay Area with outlying communities that provided raw goods for San Francisco. The peninsula of San Francisco, insofar as it had no bridges to the mainland, was an island for all purposes of trade with the East Coast. Any such commerce necessarily happened vis-a-vis ships and ferries that ran across the bay. The Big Four eventually exploited this bottleneck by purchasing the majority of ferry and steamship lines that ran from the East Bay to San Francisco, the seat of commerce and wealth in California. By the early 1870s, they had established a de facto monopoly on California shipping by establishing control in San Francisco, leaving producers and retailers no option but to meet Southern Pacific Railroad's exorbitant costs or have their product rot in the warehouse. Now, it didn't take the federal government very long to put together that massive amounts of wealth and power concentrated in the hands of a very few number of people was kind of a bad thing. And then the government turned to monopolies and said, "Hey, wait a minute, you're all horrible." To which the monopolies said back,
What took you so long, idiot?
And this is where things get a little bit hazy. After the passing of the Interstate Commerce Act in 1887, while this did open the floodgates for Congress to start regulating corporations and halt the formation of monopolies and trusts, this really didn't do anything to thwart the natural monopoly that was rail. And after World War II, commuter rail took a dive, and that's where Amtrak got formed and took over commuter rail, but freight rail still maintained its position as a dominant economic power. Enter CSX, Norfolk Southern, and Union Pacific. Just look at the sheer number of mergers between these 3 massive corporations. Now, if CSX, Norfolk Southern, and Union Pacific aren't monopolies, then I don't know what a monopoly is. No one corporation should have this much consolidated power. And we all know what this means. All these corporations, all these subsidiaries, it all means they have to make a profit. And that profit comes at a price. The price is our health, our safety, our lives, our communities. Everything can be taken away in an instant in a disaster like this. We're no strangers to it. We've seen it in Love Canal. We've seen it in Times Beach, Missouri. And for that matter, countless other places, countless other communities that are unlivable ghost towns because of the pollution. And the people who have been fighting the uphill battle for environmentalism have to share the same air with this dipshit.
This is Ohio's Chernobyl.
Who is this loser? Stu Peters. The People's Bullhorn. The Stu Peters Show? Never heard of it. Hashtag died suddenly? Don't care what that means. StuPeters.com? Never heard of it. Oh, he's an American dissident. And a true intellectual by the looks of it. Look at what these liars are saying now. As recently as August of 2021, Mark Siegel was shilling for Pfizer over at USA Today. Both Siegel and Gannett have blood on their hands. The reason they keep using the phrase, the big lie, to refer to claims of stolen elections and their Reichstag fire false flag is because they don't want you to know what the real big lie is. Reject their attempts to program you. All of them. Our cities are war zones. Murder rates are up 30% in 2020 and still climbing. Little girls and boys are being poisoned and mutilated by demonic trans doctors. Drug ODs kill 100,000 Americans annually. We're on the brink of World War III. Joe Biden is trotting around Europe pretending to be a wartime president. The US government is waging war with its own citizens, and the corporate media wants you to believe you are the virus and that there is another pandemic on the horizon. Don't believe them. Yeah, anything Captain Planet over here has to say about East Palestine is immediately discredited by vaccine misinformation, January 6th conspiracy theories of stolen elections, and whatever the hell that other rant tweet was. Murder rates are up 30%. It's like a goddamn caveman wrote that. Jeez. I bet dunking on this silly queen's posts would garner a reaction like this.
You dirty bitch! Look what you've done to my peonies!
Now, I'm not trying to downplay the disaster in East Palestine by any stretch of the imagination, but when I see smooth-brained idiots on Twitter like Stu Peters comparing a vinyl chloride disaster to Chernobyl, the leap of logic there is just so mind-numbingly stupid. I mean, the type of spill doesn't make this any less of a disaster, but come on. You don't have to be a chemist to understand how stupid that is. And if you want to enrich yourself with knowledge, I will link this technical fact sheet in the description. And what do you know, as I was editing this video, yet another story broke of yet another train derailing, this time owned by Union Pacific, and this time in Nebraska, carrying coal. Gee, this certainly has nothing to do with railroad monopolies trying to squeeze every ounce of profit they can out of whatever they're hauling. This is so exhausting, and it's only made more infuriating when people brush it off. And I get a kick out of people who have lived through decades of these issues happening year after year after year, and now all of a sudden, one derailment in 54,000 since 1990, plus the ones from 2022, and now the derailments in this year. We're in February and we're already on track to keep things going. Now people are like, oh my god, this is a disaster. It's like, yeah, it's been happening the whole time. What are you, like 50, 60, 70 years old and now you get it? Talk about too little too late. Also, what pisses me off are the people who are, they're the type of people who will be like, oh, well, it's just one of those things. Or they say, well, history's doomed to repeat itself. It's like, no, history isn't doomed to repeat itself. History is allowed to repeat itself. And like that article I read earlier, where people were working in Cleveland, and the river was so polluted. And they're just like, well, it's just one of those things, it's normal. It means industry's booming. It means people have jobs and whatever. These things get normalized, and that's not okay. It's not okay because the kind of deregulation that allows this to happen will come for you. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but what deregulation will bring will take your health, will take your life, will take your job, will take your home, and your community. What deregulation will bring will take everything from you. Everything. And you won't have a home to live in. So you kind of have to grasp the urgency of these kinds of situations. Did we dodge a bullet with East Palestine? Maybe. Could it have been a whole lot worse? Maybe. Is it going to get worse down the road depending on what the EPA discovers? Maybe. But now's the time to push back. We can no longer allow this crap. In fact, we're way past due on the time to push back. And not for a lack of trying, but how much more do we have to endure? How much longer until another Deepwater Horizon happens? Until another Exxon Valdez happens? There are entire towns that don't have safe drinking water in the United States. Look at Flint, Michigan. Look at Jackson, Mississippi. Hell, Jackson, Mississippi has been in a boil water notice since the goddamn Mesozoic era. How much more do we have to endure before something actually changes? Before we put a stop to all of this? That's all I've got. Also, I just want to point out that "they threw beans on him" is trending on Twitter. Christ for arms? What? What is happening here? They made fun of him for his arms. They threw beans on him? What? Featuring three new EDM songs from Daldo. Who the hell is Daldo? A movie about an important lesson, quoted Daldo. Who the hell is Daldo? What's the important lesson? Don't make fun of kids who have crosses for arms and don't throw beans on people? What the hell is this?